Welcome to the Samson Strength Coach Collective. On today's episode, we have Missy Mitchell-McBeth. Missy and I discuss a ton of different things, and as you'll see in the episode, she has a ton of different endeavors that she undergoes, whether it's running her own business, speaking engagements, being a podcast guest, as she obviously is with us this week, running a lead performance for volleyball team, being a representative for powerlift. I mean, the list is endless, but you can tell by the way she speaks and the way she handles herself that she absolutely dominates it. And she's honestly very open and candid about things, which is what I truly appreciate out of our guests, especially when they take the time out of their day to be with us, but then really give us real answers that I think can help our listeners. I greatly appreciate it. So we talk about how she manages all those things, what it's like to be someone who frequently speaks, and what are some mistakes that she's made previously. What does she do to make sure that she gets high quality talks out, and a bunch of other topics that I think we kind of jump from, but I think all of them are going to prove valuable for you as the listener. So as always, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. What's going on, Samson Strength Coach Collective listeners? On today's episode, we have Missy Mitchell-McBeth. Missy, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Very excited to have you on the podcast. As I've said pre-show a couple times, but I've been a follower of your work, especially on Twitter and Instagram, for a long time now. So it's exciting for me to speak with you. And one of the things that immediately got me to buy in on your program was you talked about very heavy RDLs, and that is like one of my bread and butters of my programming. So I'm very, very excited to speak with you and dive into your work specifically.
There we go. RDL squad.
RDL every time. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you the initial question that we always start off with. Can you just give me a background of your career and then what you are currently up to as you have multiple endeavors?
Yeah. So this one's always fun because I do this in no form, like no order whatsoever, because there's so much. So I'll kind of start with where I'm at now and then work backwards. So I'm currently the director of sports performance at a volleyball club called Fieldhouse in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I also run my own business, Missy Mitchell-McBeth Sports Performance, where it's mainly a coach's education platform. So targeting sport coaches, primarily in the volleyball space, teaching them principles of strength and conditioning. I wrote a book called Developmental to Division I on that topic. I also have a conditioning course, one-to-one mentoring, and in-person in-services that I do. Prior to that, I started my career as a high school volleyball coach. I did that for 4 years, figured out that strength and conditioning was the path that I wanted to take full time. So I went back to grad school, got my master's, did an internship at TCU, which turned into a full-time position. I was there 7 years total and working with women's basketball, women's volleyball, and then women's golf. Left there to take a position as a head high school strength and conditioning coach at Byron Nelson High School in the DFW area. And then I'm currently by day, when I'm not doing all of my coaching and coaching coaches in the evenings, I work for Powerlift, so Samson's competitor.
Which is fine. We always support healthy competition. Well, I mean, you mentioned so many things there. I got to ask initially, it's the first question that pops into my mind. Like, how do you balance all of that, especially with your full-time job during the day and then all the extra endeavors at night, like you mentioned?
Yeah, so full transparency, right now I'm not. It is pretty much working 17 hours a day. So day job, Powerlift is super busy. We man the state of Texas. And we have a lot of schools we work with. So then it's like I close one laptop and open another one, or I go coach or whatever. And it's just one of those seasons in your life where if you're trying to grow a business and you're trying to be successful, like you just have to put in the hours to do so. I try to get away my one activity to, not want to strangle everyone in my path is to play beach volleyball. That's kind of my mental health. I'm solar powered is what I say. So yeah, I like to, I've been through phases where I've had really great work-life balance. I'm currently not in one, and that's okay because I know that a work-life balance phase will come.
I love that perspective because I think it's 100% realistic, and I appreciate your honesty and being open about that, right? Because I think a lot of people can kind of answer that question with a little bit of a deflection, like, oh, well, I run on coffee or something, right? Like kind of like a silly joke, but it doesn't really get to the main issue of it. Like there's certainly times where strength coaches go through periods that they're very busy and there's times that they're not. What is your motivation when you are going through a time such as this now where you're working so much, and what are you looking at as the end goal, and what keeps you going when you are working 17-hour days?
That's tough. I guess like it's hard to say I'm not goal oriented, but it's like there's just work that has to be done. And it's like, you know, everyone's like, well, I don't know how you do it. And it's like, well, I just have things that they have to be accomplished. Like in order for me to sell things, like I have to accomplish this. In order for us to make deals at work, like it just has to be done. So I guess I don't really have a good answer for that. Like I'm just kind of some people create these lists and like they don't do it. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to start doing things until the work gets done kind of person.
Okay, so then let me ask you this. How do you make sure everything does get done without the list or without the kind of specific goals?
Well, that's not to say that I don't make the list, but my point was rather that like some people spend so much time like analyzing what needs to get done and like triaging it that they never actually get around to it. Because I actually have a whiteboard up here on the left hand side, or like all the upcoming things that I have to have at work. On the right hand side are upcoming speaking engagements, content calendar. Then I have a paper calendar over here on my right that has all of the events for the day. And I never schedule anything. Like I think even when it came to scheduling this podcast, I was like, hey, it's going to be a couple days because I'm not in front of that paper calendar.
Yep.
Like that is the central hub for me of making sure that I don't miss things. And occasionally I do. Like example, this morning my newsletter was supposed to contain a link, and after testing the link twice, when I sent the email, the link didn't work. You know what I mean? So occasionally stuff falls through the cracks. That's just part of being a human being. But I try to get as many things done as I can.
Well, I got to say, I mean, initially, we're only 6 minutes in the episode. I appreciate your honesty about this stuff because it's very refreshing for me. And even conversations where it might not be on a podcast, it might not be recorded with any of my other friends, I feel like they can sometimes, won't even admit like a small thing like a newsletter link not working, kind of slip through the cracks. Like that stuff does happen for everybody. So I really appreciate that honesty. And that's kind of what the goal of this podcast is to show that people that it's okay because those things do happen. And anybody who says they're perfect are truly not, and they're kind of lying to themselves and lying to you about it.
Well, I think like at the end of the day that when we put on this facade of perfection, we end up believing that that's how we should be. And I spent probably and I still struggle with this. Like I still struggle with perfectionism and that kind of stuff. But at some point, like you do have to extend yourself grace, or in times like these where it's like you're working constantly, you're also expecting perfection. Like now you're just going absolutely insane every time an error happens, where it's like, okay, I'm not going to accept if 9 out of 10 things I do are wrong. But if 1 of 10 things are wrong, like, okay, we can be a human today.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, but that's how you produce high quality work, right? Is to be able to hold yourself to a specific standard, but also give yourself some grace because certain errors are going to happen. It's funny, we were talking about it in film today, right? And that's why I was a little bit late to our recording, is because we were spending a lot of time talking about this in film. But we're playing a team coming up that is a really good 3-point shooting team. And sometimes they're going to shoot a three and they're going to make it, and we can't be devastated about it and let it ruin every single thing. So I appreciate your outlook on that. I'm curious, when you mentioned starting off 4 years as a volleyball coach, what made you transition to strength and conditioning? What was kind of the allure of strength and conditioning versus just sport coaching?
Full transparency, I absolutely hated teaching. Like I hated classroom teaching, where I would say within the first, people are like, oh, your first year, you'll make it through, whatever. I made it through my first year, but I knew within the first 2 weeks, I was like, this is just not for me. So I did make it 4 years. And then in that time frame, I was kind of given the responsibility of doing the weight room stuff for our volleyball athletes, which then turned into a few more of the girls' sports on campus. And I was like, hey, I really like this. And I had there was an actual like qualified strength coach there on campus. He's like, you're also good at this, and this is a potential career path for you where you might not have to teach school anymore. And so I did the whole having a full-time job, then having no job internship, making pennies as a paid intern, then making nickels as a full-time collegiate strength coach. So I kind of went that path. And then obviously, my career progressed from there.
What was your experience like going back to school after working full time for 4 years?
like an absolute joke
Yeah.
because it was like, so I was in grad school. It was a master's in exercise physiology with an emphasis in strength and conditioning, which I believe is fairly rare, but becoming more and more common. But at the time, it was like one of two programs in the nation. I think I went to Baylor, and it was like I'm sitting there in class, and first of all, the first class I had to take was basically like, here's getting ready for your CSCS. And I was like, already have my CSCS. Can I please take something outside of the department, an elective, to like broaden my knowledge? No. Why? You have to get ready for CSCS. Hello, reminder, already passed that. Can I please? Anyway, so it was stuff like that. And then also just the whole like theory versus practical application. Like I'd had 4 years in the real world, and then to sit in a classroom and like hear kind of like the theory side of it was a little bit of a joke. The flip side of that is I met really great people. My classmates, we each kind of went our separate directions, but everybody was fairly successful. I got to work with Charlie Melton, who's the men's basketball strength coach at Baylor, who's just a tremendous human being. So from that aspect, while the actual school portion wasn't, I don't know that it made me better. I certainly feel that there was a benefit of the networking component of my master's experience.
I really appreciate you talking about the theory versus application. It brings back a very specific instance for me where my master's is in sports psych. And so there's this giant push in sports psych for this constantly positive, no negative sort of coaching. I remember when I first started out, like trying to be the most positive person 24/7 and almost not even facing the reality of the negative side of sports. And then it took me about 2 years to really figure out like, this is not going to work. Like there's going to be some times like if we have a weight gain guy, he's going to have to eat snacks in front of me. Like we can't have full autonomy 24/7 because stuff is not going to get done. And it's just not realistic within this world. Were you able to kind of help out your students on that level and just say, hey, maybe this isn't necessarily how it's going to go 100% of the time because they didn't have that experience and you did?
What students are you referring to?
The other students within your master's program.
So not really, because everybody kind of came in with experience. Like nobody was really like fresh out of the out of like they just graduated from college, or if they had interned at like one of our interns had been with I think at Cressy's place. Another one had been a collegiate. I think there was one that had come straight from college and she'd been a collegiate athlete. So it's like they know the difference between like what works and what doesn't. So it wasn't really a situation where, even though I was, I guess, more experienced than a few of them, it wasn't really like a mentorship situation. And there actually was a coach in there that was a couple years older than me who had been out in the coaching world. So it was just kind of this like unspoken between all of us, but we were still able to, kind of learn from each other, through group projects and presentations and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I feel like like you said, the cohort aspect of it is very nice. Like I remember there was somebody who was 35 in our grad program, and he coached with Olympic lifters. He worked with Bill Starr for a long time, right? And I mean, he taught me so much about Olympic lifting that I never, could have possibly understood. I don't think I taught him very much besides how to make like super high calorie meals, but we got along well. And these are people who you take with you for the rest of your life. Now, transitioning, obviously, you said you went to an internship and then were able to actually start making money as a full-time coach. But then at your time at TCU, you obviously transitioned over into the high school realm. What was kind of the driving factor switching from collegiate to high school strength and conditioning?
Work-life balance
Yeah.
at some point. So I know you work in collegiate hoops. So that is, of every sport, the most, my experience, not to generalize to everyone, but in my experience, that is the most chaotic sport as far as, it was like 3 schedule changes per day. Just you could never plan anything. I also had two other sports, which like in Big 12, like that shouldn't happen. Like the women's basketball strength coach should not have two other sports. I would miss, multiple workouts with one of my other teams to be traveling. And like you're getting in at 2 a.m. off of a charter flight. And I would have a team the next morning at 5 a.m. It was before the 6 a.m. rule or whatever. I had women's golf the next day. And it's like I'm sleeping under my desk, setting an alarm for 4:45, brushing my teeth, going in. And the athletic director's like, you don't look like you feel well. Why are you here? Like, why don't you just reschedule the team? I'm like, because I don't have the autonomy to reschedule the team. Like I'm being told. So it was kind of like I just grew a little tired of that. I was also able to go get a pretty significant pay raise at the high school level to work half the hours. Now the days were more, collegiate level. You might train one team in a day, but you're there for 14 hours for who knows why. But high school level, you're going to train 10 groups a day, but you're going to do that in a 9 to 10 hour time window. So it's like the day drags on less. You're more productive overall. So it was just it was a change I needed at the time. And the nice thing about it is that I was able to make that transition without moving, which is really, really rare in the coaching industry.
Yeah, the not moving part has got to be incredibly appealing. I mean, because every single time, like we have a new intern who just started with us, and he asked, kind of what's the different paths he can take, and I was like, look, if you want to move up as quickly as you can, if that's your goal, then you're going to have to be willing to move. You have no choice on that aspect. So not moving, and I'm sure, did you even stay in the same house when you went to the new high school?
I did for a year, and then the commute, just because of
Yeah,
DFW traffic, was
it's
bad, and
crazy.
so then we moved. And that's kind of the other factor is that my husband is a high school coach and teacher in Texas, so I didn't have the ability to move up through the collegiate ranks. We did not have a director of Olympic sports position at TCU, nor would I have been, like somebody else would have gotten that anyway. So it's like I didn't have the opportunity to go interview and actually actively pursue other positions at the collegiate level. So it's like, okay, how can I grow? Right? I've got to stay in Texas because my family's here, my husband's here. But how can I still do this? And, how can I still stay in the profession and experience some professional growth? So the high school level was it for me at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you bring up the Dallas Fort Worth traffic, right? I know you were in John Bloom's recent book, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And John Bloom's a great friend of mine. And when I went to North Texas, we played North Texas right before Christmas break. I was like, yeah, we're staying over in Denton. And I had no clue where he lived. And he's like, yeah, it was only like a 50-minute drive. And I was like, oh, I just completely forgot about how large Dallas Fort Worth area actually is. It's
Yeah.
not what you would think. Okay, so you mentioned the work-life balance, which I agree with 100%. And, basketball, I can attest to it, is one of those sports that's really terrible about making sure that you can be there, right, for your family. And I mean, I'm talking 30 games per year guaranteed. And even if you're bad, you're still playing all 30 games. So it's an extensive schedule. And then on top of that, a perfect example, right? I specifically scheduled this podcast. I said, hey, I'm only available at 2 p.m., right? Because I thought for sure we'd be done by the time 2 p.m. rolled around. And then, of course, I had to send an email and say, sorry, Missy, I'm going to be a little bit late just because of the nature of college basketball. And obviously that can lead you to feel overworked, certainly. And I know it's a problem within strength and conditioning as a whole, but you mentioned working 17-hour days now. Is it different for you because a lot of it is more time spent on your own business? Is it different because it's more of what you specifically want to do versus the time that you had to spend at TCU, where it's all just about TCU?
So work is always work. And I think that that's something that I've realized across the course of my career is that, at first I'm like, well, I hate teaching. This sucks. So I'm going to go to strength and conditioning because that's what I love to do. And there's going to be no problems because I'm going to be a full-time strength coach. Right. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to now transition to the high school level because I don't like these things here. And then it's, you start to realize that regardless of what type of work you're doing, it's always still work. So just as an example, like as soon as I get off this call, I have a customer that like for whatever reason they can't log into their customer portal. Well, guess who gets to handle that? And like you're dealing with people that are like super short in emails or like root they've typed in their email address wrong and they're like basically shouting at you an email that your website doesn't work, right? So it's like even though yes, this is my baby, right? And I get to choose how I shape this and I get to choose what I work on and choose when I work on it. Yes, there's like some freedom in that, but at the same time, like it's not sunshine and rainbows. Like it is still a job and it's still work. And I think that, if more people understood like what being an entrepreneur is actually like, because everyone sees it, they're like, oh, you work from home or you work on your own or whatever. That's all true. And there are definitely some benefits to it. But the downfall of it is I can see from my bedroom down the hall and I can see the light coming on every time, like ting, 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 like something's hitting my inbox. So it's like you're kind of always on. So while it's cool to like grow a business and see it start to pay off and like you've invested yourself in it, it was also cool to like invest myself in my athletes over the course of 4 years, because at the time there wasn't the transfer portal, not don't want to say nonsense, but
It's
nonsense.
nonsense. Yeah, we can be real.
And it is like it's hard on everybody, even the athletes. But anyway, we didn't deal with that. So there's pros and cons to everything. I think some people think that working on their own is like a quick fix, but or an easy ticket to freedom. But really, it's like, okay, all of a sudden now, if I were to quit my day job, no plans to do so, but if I were to quit that day job and just hustle my business, that's a whole different level of stress than having a paycheck that hits the direct deposit that hits the bank, weekly or biweekly or monthly.
Yeah, I do think that idea gets romanticized a lot within strength and conditioning. Like it's very easy just to be like, well, I'll start my own business at the end of the day, right? And I'm guilty of it myself, no doubt, because I've been fortunate enough to have clients that I'll program for separately. And what I catch myself doing, and I'm glad I can at least be real with myself on this, right, is like, running workouts through Team Builder is probably my least favorite part of the day. Nothing to do with the app, right? It's just like it annoys me sometimes, and like I'd rather spend my day reading textbooks, like I have the opportunity to do here too. So I think sometimes myself, I can be like, well, it'd be easier to run my own business. It's like, no, I think it's actually way harder. Like you said, there's a steady paycheck involved with being part of an organization. There's certain things that are taken care of, right? I don't have to worry about even just buying basic supplies like a printer and the paper and things like those are through the school. And I think it can be a little bit of like rose colored glasses with how strength coaches look at running their own business a little bit. Have you seen that a lot?
Yeah, so just as a small example, like in the initial stages of, I ship my own books because the margin is like $3 to $4 higher per book, which if you know anything about book sales, like nobody is getting rich off of a book unless they're like Stephen King, or I can't even think of someone who would actually get rich off of a book, right? But, some famous author, but I'm self-published through Amazon, as we all are now, right? But it's like, I had a bubble mailer come in, and it was ripped. And I was like, that's 17 cents. 17 cents right there. I'm like, and we're taping it up and we're sending, you know what I mean? And it's like, that's something where if you are in a school, or if I were working out of the powerlift office and there were a ripped mailer, I would just simply throw it in the trash. So it's like you said, I think people romanticize it, but then once you actually sit on the business side of things, like, and start to realize like, oh, this costs money. Like my printer ran out of toner and it's like $120, and you're just like, I wasn't prepared for that, because someone has always just sent me my toner in the mail, and I didn't think like a lady in the office orders it and sends it to me. Like I don't think about that stuff. So yeah, like I definitely think there are some there's a learning curve to it, which actually, like, I think is a really good thing, because let's say that I wanted to pursue like corporate stuff, like move up the ladder, like in sales or whatever. It gives you a different perspective, understanding like what it is like to be the person writing those checks.
Yeah, I mean, it's even funny too. You bring it up, and the main thing that I think about is our free protein shakes that we get every day, right? I can easily grab 2 muscle milks, no problem, and I won't have to worry about it. But if I were running my own business, I'd certainly have to pay for those. And so I do appreciate your outlook on it. It's something I've very briefly spoken with Scott Caulfield on it about it as well too, because there's a video I posted where I said, yeah, this is my schedule right now in season, and it kind of sucks, right? Where I might be here from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. on one day per week, just because it's so happened like that. But here's my schedule in May, and I literally pulled up my old Google Calendar, and it was like one voluntary lift group scheduled, and then the rest of it was 100% free time. And we've just talked about, how it just seems like people can kind of get a little bit caught up in what their schedules look like or what their own position is. And at the end of the day, like you said, it's work is work. There's benefits and there's downsides to every single thing that you do. And so it should be, even more to your perspective, like there's work that has to get done. So just get it done instead of worrying about what's the next step or what is, the ultimate end goal. Maybe it should just be more directed around making sure that you make your own working day as successful as possible for you.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I do want to touch on the book certainly because I love hearing about people's books and I love hearing about the experience of it because I know sometimes it can be arduous and sometimes it can be the most fun people have ever had. And sometimes it's both. What kind of inspired you to write the specific book that you did, especially for volleyball athletes? It's volleyball specific, correct?
Yeah, as much as anything,
Yeah.
okay. As much
Marketed.
as strength and
Yeah.
conditioning coaches will admit the word sport specificity.
Yeah.
So what inspired it? Number one, tired of answering the same questions about strength and conditioning over and over and over again. Now I get to answer those same questions to people who bought the book 10 minutes ago and already have a question that they haven't read yet, right? So I kind of shot myself in the foot thinking like, oh, I'll just write this book and nobody will ever ask me these questions again because I've answered it all for them. But people can't read. But anyway, so that was kind of the thing is like selfishly, like let's make it where I can just have an easy resource of like, here's 275 pages of 20 years of experience of my thoughts. Um, the selfless reason was I was a high school volleyball coach. Like I said, I was teaching class. I was doing the volleyball schedule. I was doing the budget. I was teaching two preps at one point. I was coaching three sports total. And then on top of it, I was tasked with being the strength coach. And it's like I look back at that experience, and I think a lot of times strength and conditioning coaches like to take little shots at sport coaches. And I've taken my fair share on Twitter as well. And it's like we sit in our little like ivory strength coach tower and judge, why do you do that? This, why do you do that? Well, I'll tell you why, because they work the equivalent of 5 jobs within one. And then we're adding this 6th job of being a strength coach on top of it. And then we're telling them that they suck because they're not doing it as well as us who we have one job, right? So it was like, how do I get information into the hands of sport coaches that is practical, that they can modify to their setting, that's simple enough to understand? So I wrote the book to be an easy read. I wrote the book where, yeah, there's an entry barrier there. Like you have to be willing to put in some work to build the program out of it. But overall, like my mom has read the book and she tells me one day, she's like, my physical therapist started me in progression 3 on the hip hinge. And I think he should have started me at progression 1. And I was like, that's why I
Boom.
wrote the book. Like my mom, who has never played a sport, who has never done exercise beyond walking, can pick up that resource and be like, I can identify and solve a problem in my own setting. So that's kind of what the book was about.
Well, I love that, and I think it's interesting as collegiate strength coaches because I'll get a lot of coaches from high school ask me similar questions, right? And what can be done a lot of times is I think they'll look into programs in collegiate sector and say, let me do exactly what these people do, right? Where these are highly developed athletes, especially at somewhere like Texas Tech, right? Like we have the best of the best that we can possibly recruit. And we might practice 2.5 to 3 hours at the time, right? And so I remember a high school coach came in and asked me like, oh, should we run practices like this? And I was like, I don't really think that'd be 100% optimal. And they're like, how many days a week should we condition? Like, should we do 4? And I was like, I don't think that'd be the best either, really. I think we can find a way around it. And it was funny because we had just one conversation and she was able to make a lot of changes that she felt really helped her program. But like you said, we spent years in school over this. We spent years running programs specifically just for strength and conditioning. So it's not fair to judge a sport coach based off of what they specifically say. And even, I know the whiteboard sometimes tweets, right? Where some can be just, plain negligence at the end of the day, where we're talking 10 by 10 on every lift. Some can actually be severely, detrimental to the athlete. But sometimes I feel like, and I believe I've seen you mention this before too. It's like unnecessarily roasting these people. And I know your thing is also educating as well too. You don't want to say something and then just say you suck and then not actually giving what can be improved or what can be done to actually help it out. So I love that you wrote a book about that.
Yeah, and I do think like to that point about, we all get on social media and we're like, these programs suck. I think that there's, and again, I've done that before. I try to now like have morphed my approach a little bit to trying to be more helpful, like saying, hey, this is bad. Here's why, but here's something that you can do. However, I think sometimes like being really concise and pointed with those statements of this is wrong, I think that it's not going to impact the person who wrote that workout that's incorrect, But maybe what it does is creates like cognitive dissonance in someone that's looking and saying, wait, I thought that was a good thing. Let me go learn more about this. Right. So I don't mean to say that like we should never like flame some of those
Yeah.
things. Like sometimes like you do need to call out what's wrong. But I think the intent has to come from wanting to help versus like wanting it to be clickbait, because I'm pretty sure that like 50% of those whiteboard things or more, the coach went and wrote themselves. Like,
Yeah.
let's be honest.
That's a fantastic point. But I agree. I do think things like that should be called out, but I do appreciate the at least education aspect of it as well. Because I think it is, like you said, I love the term ivory tower, and I'm certainly going to keep using that from here on out, right? It's very easy. And what I always joke about is optimal conditions, right? Strength and conditioning always operates under optimal conditions. Well, I've never once seen optimal conditions in my career. And I've been at some pretty amazing places. So it's not an easy thing to do. But I think, again, the book is a very valuable resource for people. And one other thing that I'm very curious about, which you've done a ton of, is public speaking. And I think a lot of coaches do aspire to public speak. I think they hope to present and they hope to be on podcasts. What is some advice you have for coaches who want to be able to pursue those opportunities?
Number one is just do it when you're asked. I think a lot of people kind of maybe think, hey, I want to do this. But then once they get asked, they're like, I don't have any value to add to this audience. And speaking from the perspective of the person who I'm in a position where right now, as I'm looking at speaker lineups that I'm in, I'm like, I am by far the dumbest person in this lineup, like no question in my mind. You know what I mean? But then it's like, I go through the process, I prepare myself, I speak on a topic that I know that I'm a subject matter expert in. And then I go in and like get great feedback, right? Even from the other speakers. And then I generally get like more opportunities out of that. So it's like you have to own the fact that you've been asked to speak and have confidence in that. And then take those opportunities. And then with those opportunities, like a lot of people, they just don't practice, they don't prepare. Like, and I'm a person that, people are like, oh, wow, you get up there and you sound so confident. I'm like, really? Because I almost threw up in my mouth, like right before I got up here, because I put a lot of pressure on myself. But it's like I practice and I prepare, and I've kind of, like I've been to like an art of coaching speaker school, and I've worked with Brett like to refine my technique and kind of like refine messaging and like create common themes and like have hooks in there and that kind of stuff. Because that in and of itself is a skill, and it's a skill that you can develop. And this is not something that I've, ever really started to do until recently when I've tried to get into different markets. But you can also apply for those things. Like the National High School Strength Coaches Association, there's an application process for members. So if you are looking to get in and you're maybe not getting those opportunities, sometimes it's because people just don't know that you would be willing to do it. So if you know someone that's organizing an event, like I reached out to, we were going to host and sponsor, not host, we were going to sponsor a clinic for powerlift. And the coach said, oh, it's a volleyball, track, and football deal. And I was like, well, hey, coach, I don't know if you know this, but I know a really good volleyball strength coach if you ever wanted to speak. And he was like, oh, you'll speak next year, right? So it's like, if you don't market yourself, don't expect people to come looking for you. Sometimes they will. Sometimes they'll find you if you have like a fairly big social media presence or they've seen you elsewhere. But sometimes you do actually have to actively seek those opportunities out.
Yeah, I love that point, because I think sometimes it can feel like you are almost like trying to boast yourself, or you're trying to be too prideful and say like, well, I have something I know I can speak on. But at the same time, like you said, it's very hard to just discover somebody, especially if you don't have a social media following. Like, how is anybody going to know that you can really bring something of value unless it's your best friend who's setting up the clinic, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, and let me assure you, as a person that's had to organize and like create speaker lineups and that kind of stuff, there is nothing better than someone reaching out and being like,
Yes.
I want to speak, because then I'm like, oh, that's one less spot I have to fill, right?
Yes.
Like one less person I have to worry about if their date and time works, because this person will speak at 9 or 1 or whatever. So, yeah, don't be scared to put yourself out there. Like I've learned that from sales. I've learned that from running my business. Like you always want to think like, oh, my body of work is going to get me noticed. No, it doesn't.
Yep.
You telling people about your body of work is going to get you noticed. And that's the unfortunate, like you look at social media, you're like, oh, your Twitter, your Instagram, like Instagram is something where I am out like actively working to improve my content delivery. And anyone that has a big following is a person who has actively worked to grow that following. And if
Yep.
people tell you otherwise, they're probably lying because it takes a lot of time to do that stuff. And it's, it can feel like, oh, gross, like self promotion. I was taught, early in strength coaching, like never do that.
Yeah.
People will just see your work. But everyone around you is doing it. So you should probably step up to the plate and do it as well.
100%. And that's where I can see sometimes people complain and say like, well, I don't know why that person got that opportunity, and it's like, I think they don't really know what they're thinking. I'm like, first of all, shut up, like, cause
Yeah.
you never know what their situation is. But second of all, they put themselves out there and they were willing to, say, or get rejected, and if I've done it before, I've applied to a million NSCA clinics. Now, my first one I ever applied to was a national one without ever having a public speaking event, which was about as dumb as it gets. Right. But being able to be denied, like it's okay. And I think it shows that you're willing to put yourself out there. And it's so you make me laugh when you talk about somebody reaching out to you. Like when we have podcast guests reach out to me, I'm like, hell yes, because it makes my
Yeah.
life so much easier. And it's even there's been, I was a coach who came on who I would have been scared to ask because he's very well known. And I was like, I don't know if he'd say no, or yes, and it was me being shy, but he's the one who had eventually asked to come on. So it just makes it a better situation. I think the self-promotion aspect isn't greedy, but it does allow you to advance yourself. I'm a big mistakes guy. I love hearing about mistakes. Like, what is a mistake that you first made when you first started public speaking? Then how did you improve upon
Oh God, how long do we have?
it?
I would say the biggest one was feeling like in 45 to 60 minutes, like I had to unpack every facet of a topic, right? And now it's like the last presentation that I gave, I literally went up there and I was like, listen, like I'm going to go over three things and understand that I'm only going to scratch the surface of those three things. My job is to, and this is something that like Brett Bartholomew taught me, like your job is to stimulate thought. It's not to tell them everything you know in 45 minutes. So it's like, here are my three topics for volleyball strength and conditioning. Boom, boom, boom. I'm going to give you a little bit of information. If you want more information, here's some resources, or go look it up on your own, right? And not to say that I'm up there like, oh, like this is just a sales pitch or whatever, but just understanding that instead of like trying to bomb people again with everything or every piece of information, like really really simplify your messaging so that you can be really really clear and make a few take home points with people, because I think that that's more impactful than trying to just like throw everything at them. It also eases your job up there. Like every time I present, I'm like, fewer slides, fewer words, fewer topics, you know what I mean? So like I'm trying to get it down to where I'm like like I have one presentation that the next time I give it, I want it to be 30 minutes, because the kind of like tone of the presentation is getting more done in less time. So I'm like, ooh, to make this really impactful, I want to be at like 29 minutes and 59 seconds, right? So just saying less in general in my presentations would be the growth, I suppose.
I can identify with that extremely. I was asked to speak with a group of local high school coaches here in North Carolina, and I remember like, okay, I was doing my presentation. I kind of got my main points set out, and I set out with the goal of exactly what you mentioned. And then it being one of my first presentations, I mean, I just kept adding things in nonstop. I was like, okay, well, I didn't talk about plyometrics, and then we actually had to talk about conditioning and agility training and all these things. And then by the time I ran through and did a practice presentation, it was supposed to be an hour and a half. I think it would have took me 2.5 hours to actually get everything that I had written down. So I think that's definitely a mistake that I've made as well too. But again, what I love is when I can read a book and I can take one solid thing that I'll always remember from it, or if I can see a presentation and take one thing that I know for a fact I'll never forget. I think those are the way more impactful talks that I go to versus the ones that kind of just try to detail everything and then I kind of get lost in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Missy, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. I mean, I've always been a fan of you via social media, but now I'm a fan of you as a person because we got to speak, and I really appreciate your time. For somebody who
Well,
does want
thank
to,
you.
oh yeah, of course, absolutely. For anybody who wants to follow you on social media or wants to follow along with your business, what would be the best way to do that?
Social media, my handles on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, and Instagram are the same. It's at Missy M. McBeth, MCBETH, no A. And then my website is missymitchellmcbeth.com. So there's only either one. You can either Google or you can just type my name in on social media. There's only one of me. Thank the Lord in heaven above for that. But I'm pretty easy to find.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.